New research is looking at the long-term future of wildfires and asking the question, if we can't stop wildfires from happening, how do we better live with them? For more on this, we're joined on the KCBS Ring Central Newsline by Dr. Michael Gollner, Assistant Professor of Mechanical Engineering at UC Berkeley. Professor, thanks for the time. I've heard planners say that you can still build in some of the WUI areas, the wildland urban interface, but they have to be communities that are planned and designed for quick evacuation if we need to.
Right. Well, evacuation is a critical component, but we really look at a holistic approach, and California has building codes and standards about how we harden structures so that they don't ignite from the fires. Evacuation is a key component. But also we think of what's called defensible space, or the space around the homes and communities, and lowering that wildfire exposure. California is incredibly exposed across the state, and so we really have to think, where are there possible places to build? And so we have to start thinking about designing these sort of low-risk communities. We do this in other natural disasters.
But we're running out of space.
Right. I mean, it's a challenge, obviously, with the real estate market now and everything else. And I think a lot of people are very concerned about urban sprawl. And I think that is a concern here. And what we have to think about is placement of homes in lower risk areas. But where we do this, there's not going to be zero risk in many communities. And so we have to think about how we can build communities so that they're going to resist a possible wildfire. Most structures don't ignite from the fire itself, but actually from small flying embers, and they can travel more than 2 miles. So we really have to think about how we build and building structures to withstand that potential fire.
What about the idea of cutting back a lot of these, thinning the forest? That's a possibility. I've heard, experts say, if we just cut down on the fuels, then these wildfires wouldn't burn as long and as hard.
Well, that's going to make a tremendous impact, but it's not about, just thinning. To actually achieve much, you usually need to bring prescribed fire back on the land, right? There's a whole bunch of litter that winds up on the ground, and bringing these forests and other lands back to sort of a natural ecosystem that's adapted to fire, which is something that California's already had, is going to require that sort of long-term maintenance. And so some areas that require thinning too, but a lot of times prescribed fire. That's going to reduce risk to communities too. But the fire is still going to be there. And so it's really a joint approach. If we can, prevent these fires from being so huge and having them more manageable, and at the same time building communities that are safer and aren't going to burn so that we can safely evacuate, that's going to totally change the risk equation. But it's going to take a huge investment. It's going to take a multi-faceted approach, not just from government, but also people chipping in and getting into these programs and taking some of that responsibility.
So are we talking satellites in the air, tests on the ground using artificial intelligence?
All of these things help, but I think the focus has been so much on response. And when we talk about satellites, that can help firefighters. That can help do early detection. We can try to put out fires earlier on the worst days, but some fires are still going to slip through the cracks, especially under 70-mile-an-hour Santa Ana or Diablo winds. And so we have to accept that we can't just try to prepare for the big fire by responding effectively. We also just need to make our landscapes so they're resilient and adapted to fire. And like you said, that's going to mean going into our natural lands and bring them more back to a fire cycle so that they have prescribed fire and thinning, but also making sure our communities won't burn. We have building codes that are very effective. California Building Code Chapter 7A, and we're always updating and putting new science in that. But it's hard to do that on existing homes. And so that's going to require incentive, that's going to require push, and hopefully there's going to be more and more of that, not just to focus on the fire at hand, but preparing for the fire in a couple years. And then there won't be as much of a rush. And I think as that risk reduces, we're going to be better at suppressing potential fires.
All right, Doctor. Thank you. Dr. Michael Gollner, Assistant Professor of Mechanical Engineering at UC Berkeley.